Hi guys, Philip Good here. I am a relationship coach and an abuse recovery specialist. What this video is about me writing the first chapter of my book. The first chapter is about my life, and the second part of the book will be about the transformation. The first part, my growing up years until I was 18 and I left home, was all about different degrees of violence, right? And then, of course, from 18 to 22, when I met my wife and found out that she actually had a violent childhood as well, usually due to our father's drinking alcohol and then becoming violent. So, and then, like I say, at 22, we got married at 23, and that's part of the transformation started then, or actually before we got married, because we set out a blueprint for what we wanted in our life, to be so different than our respective parents. But anyway, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk through the first chapter of my book. And the title of my book is Ignited by the Bottle, Delivered by the Fist. That's the title. A confronting title, yes, I know. But it's raw and real. And you guys might be able to identify with the story, similar to your own, because we've all got our own stories, right? So, chapter one, what I call it is chapter one is First Blood. So before we come into this life, we have a pre-life mission. And as it turns out, my pre-life mission was to break the silence of violence, break the cycle of violence in my family that had been going on for generations, passed down from one generation to the other. So my pre-life mission was to come in and break that cycle, so that stop it once and for all time, go from out of control to in control. So for me, it was going to mean a lot of violence, and so but I agreed with my pre-life mission. I agreed with the people that I was talking to, like organizing my life, this incarnation. And I discovered, like many of you may have found out, I opened my Akashic Records, which is the records of our life and our journey, our mission for this life, and what we've done up to date and what we still have to do in our life, depending on what our age is. Anyway, I discovered that, yes, that was true. That was my life mission. And now I am 72 years of age, and I have changed a lot of things in my life. So I've, pretty well 90% of my life mission or pre-life mission has been achieved in this lifetime. There's about 10% still to go, and that actually is writing this book and releasing it to you guys. So it's my story, our transformation, and how you guys can identify your story with my story and my wife's story, and then you can look at the transformation that we went through, and you might be able to use that or adapt it to your own life and for your own transformation, and help improve the quality of your relationship with yourself firstly, and then with your spouse, and also your children, and also your friends and colleagues. Right. So first things first. So my mother became pregnant with me way back in 1951 when she was 21 years of age. And but in 1952, she miscarried. My mother miscarried. And before I opened my Akashic Records, which I only opened a couple of years ago, I always knew that was me, because all I was looking at was, I had a picture of what my life was going to be like going forward. The amount of violence and the hits and punches I was going to have to sustain, and in order to go through the violence in order to get to a point where, I was stopping it, and all that entailed, all the hurt, all the pain, all the anguish, all the heartache, the lack of love, and all that sort of thing. That's what my future was going to be. So anyway, when my mother became pregnant in 1952, I decided, I know, I can't handle this, and so I bailed out. My mother miscarried, and I knew that was me, and that was confirmed when I opened my Acacia Records. So fast forward to 1953, and my mother had become pregnant again, and I was about to be born and it was actually my birthday is the 30th of May, 1953. So I was coming through again, and believe it or not, the last minute I thought, no, I can't handle this life. I can't handle it. I'm going to bail out again. So, and my mother said she was in labor 4 days with me, 4 days in labor. And at the last minute, I had the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. I had turned purple, and I was pretty much close to dying. But the doctors obviously gave me oxygen and so on, and I survived. And so I came into this life, and all the volatility and violence that entailed. Anyway, so fast forward to when I was not quite 1 year old, but close to it, say 10, 11 months old. My mother was also pregnant with my brother, who was a year younger than me, and he was born on the 3rd of July, 1954, pretty much a year later in a month after I was born. So anyway, my parents had a holidaying down at a place called Okura, and this is an inlet on the north shore of Auckland, New Zealand. And it was actually a batch that was owned by my grandfather, my dad's father, and my mum and dad used to go down there quite often and stay. And the attraction down there was that Okura had an inlet, a tidal inlet, and at low tide, the tide went a long way up, and you could get a lot of pippies and cockles down there. So that was one of the attractions, and I can remember going down there with my dad, mum and dad and myself and grandpa as well. We'd come down and we'd load up a sugar sack full of pippies and cockles and haul them back, and they'd have the big ball ups of, in the pot with, and have the shells opening and having a big feed of pippies and cockles. And and of course, all the beer that was drunk at the same time, having a real old shindig, a real old party. And but anyway, that's what happened on this particular occasion. My 18-year-old auntie, my mum's youngest sister, there were three of them. My mother was the eldest, and she had a middle sister and my youngest, her youngest sister, my auntie Jean actually was her name. And my middle auntie, the one between my mother and my auntie Jean, was Auntie Judy, and she was the middle sister. But anyway, Auntie Jean was only about 18 years of age at that stage, and she was staying the weekend with us. So my father gone and got the cockles and stuff, and had a big boil up, and he was having a beer, and my mother had asked him, "Can you please feed Phil?" And he got me sitting up in the high chair in the kitchen, or in the dining room actually. And anyway, he was feeding me and having a beer at the same time and stuff. And all of a sudden, I must have thought, well, I've had enough. I'm full. So it was a plastic plate with food on it, and what I did was I pushed the plate off the high chair. Okay. So it went onto the floor. A little bit of food was in the plate. Went over the floor. The plate didn't break because it was plastic, obviously. But my father, having been boozing for a while, and it was the booze and the alcohol made his temper, he had a really quick wick anyway, and I could flare up at any time. But alcohol just made him that much worse, So So in a fit of rage, all of a sudden he went bang. So he knocked me clean out of my high chair, and I went flying across the kitchen and dining room floor and ending up at my 18-year-old auntie's feet. And she said to my father, "You can't do that. He's only a little baby. He's only a little toddler. You can't do that." And my father's reply was, "Go and get your fucking bag, pack it. I'm taking you home to your Bible bashing parents." So that's what happened there. So I used to joke to my brothers and my kids in later years to say that, well, if I hadn't been knocked out of my high chair, and my obviously my head would have been and what was inside my head would have been floating around and all in turmoil and stuff. And I said, if I hit on the head and bashed like that, I probably would have ended up a genius, right? But no, I didn't. I was okay at school, but I had to work very, very hard. I wasn't a nerd. I wasn't the top of the class, but I tried very hard. So, but anyway, that was me, and so that's how that ended up. I can always think, when I'm thinking about that situation, and as an adult, and when I became a father myself, I have 4 children and 11 grandchildren now, and I think about that moment, that instance, and I think when I look back at my father, one of the two people in the world that are supposed to love me most and supposed to protect me, as an 11-month-old, looking back at my father, obviously I would have been screaming my head off and crying and so on, because of the hurt and pain and so on. But when I look back at my father, what would I have been thinking? What would I have been thinking? As a father myself and a grandfather, I just shake my head and think, how could a father do that to their own child? How could you do that? What sort of mindset must you have to do something like that? Imagine the anger and the rage you must have to have had to do something like that. So this story, obviously, anyway, I was only 11 months old, so I didn't remember that story. But that story of that incident was actually